In a family built on the foundations of power and money, love is often just another form of currency, and betrayal, a surprisingly profitable investment. The rain lashed against the tall, imposing windows of the Hayes estate, a grand old mansion nestled in the wealthy suburbs of Boston. Its relentless drumming, a fitting soundtrack to the night a life was systematically erased. For Ethan Hayes, the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest raging within his own mind. He woke up not in his own bed, with the familiar scent of old books and turpentine from his art studio, but in a room that was clinically, terrifyingly white. The sheets were crisp, the air smelled of antiseptic, and a thick leather strap was buckled tightly across his chest, pinning him to the narrow bed. His mind, foggy and slow, struggled to piece together the fragments of the previous evening. He remembered Ava, his beautiful, gentle fiancée, handing him his nightly cup of chamomile tea, her hand slightly trembling as she did. He remembered her smile, which for the first time did not seem to reach her eyes, and he remembered his twin sister, Eleanor, standing beside her, her expression one of cool, detached victory. They had watched him drink, their smiles perfectly aligned, yet as cold and sharp as shards of glass. That was the last thing he remembered before being swallowed by a thick, suffocating darkness. Faintly, as if from a world away, he could hear the fading wail of a siren, an ambulance driving away from the grand gates of his home, carrying him. The horrifying truth began to seep into his consciousness, colder and more paralyzing than the sterile air he was breathing. They hadn't called for help for him. They had called to have him taken away. Confusion gave way to a surge of pure, unadulterated fear, but beneath it all, a deeper, more excruciating pain began to bloom. It was the agony of betrayal, a wound so profound it seemed to tear his very soul apart. It wasn't the sterile white room that was his prison, nor the leather strap that held him down. His true prison was the memory of those two smiling faces, the faces of the woman he was going to marry and the sister who shared his blood. He didn't know precisely where he was, or why this was happening with such calculated cruelty. But he knew one thing with chilling certainty. His name was Ethan Hayes, an artist and an heir, and his life, his identity, his very existence had just been stolen. To the outside world, the Hayes family was the epitome of American success, a dynasty forged in the sterile, high-stakes world of pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. Their name, emblazoned on the towering headquarters of Hayes Global in downtown Boston, was a symbol of innovation, wealth, and unassailable power. Hayes Global was a titan of industry, a sprawling empire of research labs, manufacturing plants, and corporate offices whose influence reached into every hospital, every pharmacy, and nearly every home. But within the cold, marble halls of their family estate, the family was less a unit of love and more a fragile ecosystem of power, resentment, and unspoken rivalries, all orbiting the gravitational center of its patriarch, Richard Hayes. Richard ruled his family the same way he ruled his boardroom, with an iron will and an unshakable belief in his own judgment. He was a man who saw the world in black and white, in profit and loss, in strength and weakness. He had inherited a respectable company from his own father, and, through decades of ruthless ambition and shrewd, often brutal, decision-making, had transformed it into a global behemoth. He respected only one thing: strength. And in his eyes, only one of his children truly possessed it. That child was Eleanor Hayes. The elder of his fraternal twins by a mere 7 minutes, Eleanor was her father's daughter in every conceivable way, a perfect reflection of his ambition, polished to a modern, lethal sheen. With sharp intelligence and a charisma that could be switched on and off like a surgeon's lamp, she had climbed the corporate ladder at Hayes Global with a speed that was both admired and feared. She was the executive vice president of strategic development, a title that barely contained her influence. She lived and breathed the company, her days starting before dawn with market analyses from Tokyo and ending late at night with conference calls to London. She saw her father's empire, not as a legacy to be preserved, but as a territory to be conquered and expanded. Her defining feature was a complete lack of sentimentality, a trait Richard openly praised. He would often recount the story of how, at 25, Eleanor had orchestrated a hostile takeover of a smaller rival, personally firing its aging founder, a man who had been a friend of the family. While others had been appalled, Richard had seen the glint of a true successor, a killer instinct he believed was essential for survival. Eleanor's resentment, however, was a deeply rooted and carefully hidden plant, and its soil was her relationship with her twin brother, Ethan. Ethan Hayes was the family's beautiful, tragic anomaly. Where Eleanor was sharp angles and cold steel, Ethan was soft curves and warm canvas. His world was one of color, texture, and quiet observation. He was a gifted artist, a painter whose talent was undeniable, even to a man like Richard, who saw no monetary value in it. Ethan's hands, which his father lamented had never held a quarterly report with any conviction, could coax breathtaking life from a blank canvas. He saw the world, not in terms of assets and liabilities, but in light and shadow, in the hidden emotions that flickered across a person's face. He had no interest in the power plays and boardroom battles that animated his sister and father. The endless talk of stock prices and market penetration was, to him, a gray, monotonous noise. All he desired was a quiet life, the freedom to create in his sun-drenched studio, and the love of his fiancée, Ava Chen, a woman whose gentle demeanor he believed was a refuge from the cold ambition of his family. Richard treated Ethan with a kind of weary disappointment, viewing his artistic passion as a frivolous hobby, a genetic misstep. He funded Ethan's life out of a sense of duty, but his approval was a currency Ethan could never earn. For Eleanor, Ethan was something far worse than a disappointment. He was an insult. He was a constant, living reminder of a perceived cosmic injustice. They were twins, born of the same moment. Yet he drifted through life on a cloud of artistic temperament, seemingly unburdened by the immense weight of their family's legacy, a weight she carried willingly, eagerly even. She saw him as weak, naive, and utterly undeserving of the Hayes name, and the fact that he stood as an equal, at least in birthright, was a source of constant, simmering rage. And then there was Sophia, the youngest, the one who had escaped. Sophia was the family's conscience, and for that, she had been effectively exiled. Years ago, unable to stomach another family dinner where human lives were discussed as clinical trial statistics or another holiday celebration that felt more like a corporate networking event, she had confronted her father. She had railed against the company's aggressive patenting practices that put life-saving drugs out of reach for the poor, against the very soullessness of the world he had built. Richard had dismissed her as an idealistic fool, and Sophia, realizing she could not change them, decided to leave them. She joined a humanitarian organization, dedicating her life to providing medical aid in developing nations, a world away from the gilded cage of her youth. Her only true connection back home was Ethan. They were allies, two gentle souls born into a family of predators. They didn't speak often, but when they did, their conversations were a lifeline. Ethan would describe his latest painting, the way the light fell across a winter landscape, and Sophia would tell him about the small victories, the child whose fever she had helped break, the village that now had clean water. They were the keepers of each other's true selves, a bond of quiet understanding that Eleanor could never comprehend, and therefore deeply resented. It was this intricate web of dysfunction, a father who equated love with strength, a daughter who mirrored his ruthlessness, a son who rejected their entire world, and another daughter who had fled from it, that defined the House of Hayes. It was a structure built on a foundation of immense wealth, but riddled with cracks of jealousy and contempt, waiting for the one seismic event that would bring the whole magnificent facade crashing down. The seismic event that would finally shatter the fragile structure of the Hayes family came without warning, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Richard Hayes, the titan who had weathered hostile takeovers, market crashes, and federal investigations, fell not in a boardroom battle or a public scandal, but in the quiet solitude of his mahogany-paneled study. A massive coronary event, the doctors said, quick and likely painless. For a man whose life had been a symphony of noise and conflict, his end was unnervingly silent. The news of his death did not so much inspire grief as it did a profound and immediate realignment of power. A king was dead, and the question of succession hung heavy and unspoken in the air. The days that followed were a masterclass in controlled appearances. Eleanor, displaying a chillingly perfect composure, took charge of all the arrangements. She selected the casket, wrote the obituary, and greeted the endless stream of business associates and society figures with a somber dignity that everyone mistook for strength. She was already playing the part of the new matriarch, the undisputed heir. Ethan, by contrast, was adrift in a sea of genuine, complicated grief. He wept not for the loss of a warm, loving father, for he had never truly had one, but for the loss of the possibility of one, for the final, irrevocable end of a lifetime spent hoping for a single word of heartfelt approval that never came. Ava was a constant, supportive presence at his side, her hand always on his arm, her voice a soothing murmur in his ear, a perfect portrait of the devoted fiancée. The day of the will reading arrived, cold and gray. The family gathered in the downtown law offices of Abernathy, Finch, and Dalton, a firm that had managed the Hayes family's legal affairs for 3 generations. The room was like a mausoleum, paneled in dark wood and lined with leather-bound books that smelled of dust and money. A large window offered a panoramic view of the Boston skyline, including the monolithic Hayes Global Tower, a silent testament to the prize at stake. Eleanor sat perfectly poised in a high-backed leather chair, her black dress impeccably tailored, her expression unreadable. She radiated a confidence that bordered on entitlement. This was a mere formality, the public coronation she had been preparing for her entire life. Ethan sat opposite her, looking profoundly uncomfortable, his artist's soul allergic to the sterile, transactional atmosphere of the room. Ava sat beside him, her presence a small island of perceived warmth in the cold, tense room. Mr. Abernathy, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with discreet disapproval, cleared his throat and broke the heavy seal on a thick vellum envelope. He began to read in a dry, monotonous tone that belied the explosive contents of the document. The preliminary bequests were predictable. Various properties, charitable donations, and personal effects were distributed. Then came the personal trusts. To my daughter, Eleanor Hayes, Abernathy read, I leave the Manhattan penthouse apartment, the art collection housed therein, and a personal, unrestricted trust fund in the amount of $50 million. A soft murmur of approval went through the room. It was a princely sum, a fitting gift for the heir apparent. Eleanor inclined her head slightly, a subtle, regal acknowledgement. This was merely the appetizer. Abernathy paused, adjusting his spectacles as he turned the page. And now, he said, his voice dropping slightly, we come to the matter of the Hayes family trust. This was it, the main event. The trust was the heart of the empire, the legal entity that held the 51% controlling interest in Hayes Global. Whoever controlled the trust controlled everything. Eleanor leaned forward almost imperceptibly, her mask of cool composure still firmly in place, but her eyes held a new, sharp intensity. Abernathy continued, the Hayes family trust and all its assets, including the controlling shares of Hayes Global, shall be placed under the sole trusteeship and voting authority. He paused again, a theatrical affectation he had perfected over 40 years. Of my son, Ethan Hayes. The words dropped into the silent room like stones into a frozen pond. For a moment, no one reacted. The statement was so contrary to every known fact of the Hayes family dynamic that it seemed like a mistake, a misreading. Ethan was the first to break the spell. He physically recoiled, as if struck. His eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from the lawyer to his sister. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. This wasn't a gift, it was a sentence. A life he never wanted, a responsibility he was terrified of, had just been thrust upon him. Across the table, Eleanor's reaction was far more terrifying. She did not gasp, she did not protest, she simply went still. An unnatural, absolute stillness. The carefully constructed facade of the grieving, capable daughter didn't just crack, it vaporized, revealing something raw and primordial beneath. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin the color of bleached bone. Her jaw tightened, a small, hard muscle twitching just below her ear. Her eyes, fixed on Mr. Abernathy, narrowed into dark, vacant slits. It was not the wild, hot rage of a tantrum, but the cold, dense fury of a collapsing star. She had been publicly, profoundly, and eternally humiliated by the one man whose respect she had killed herself to earn. As if sensing the need for an explanation, Abernathy cleared his throat and picked up a separate, smaller envelope. Mr. Hayes attached a personal letter, he explained, to be read at this time. He unfolded the single sheet of paper and read Richard's final, damning words. "My children," the letter began, "if you are hearing this, then my race is run. I have spent my life building an empire, and my final duty is to ensure its survival. Eleanor, you have my ambition, my drive, my ruthlessness. I have always been proud of that. But I fear you have too much of it. You would gamble the empire for the sake of winning. You see every challenge as a war to be won, no matter the cost. A legacy is not built on scorched earth." The words were a series of precise, surgical strikes against the very core of Eleanor's identity. "Ethan," the letter continued, "he has his mother's heart. He is quiet and he is observant. He has no desire for power, and therefore he is the only one I can trust to wield it responsibly. He will not be tempted by glory or greed. He will preserve what I have built, not risk it on a dangerous gamble. He will be the guardian, the steward. This is not a punishment, Eleanor. It is a safeguard. But it was a punishment. It was the ultimate, final rejection. Richard had not seen her as his successor. He had seen her as a threat, a liability to be managed. He had mistaken her brother's weakness for integrity. The letter was finished. Abernathy refolded it. The silence in the room was now thick with something toxic. Without a word, without even a glance at her stunned brother, Eleanor rose from her chair. She stood tall and straight, her movements fluid and controlled. She turned and walked out of the office, her heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the polished marble floor. She didn't slam the door. She closed it with a soft, deliberate click that was somehow more violent than a shout. Ethan was left staring at the heavy oak door, the legal documents in front of him feeling like a ticking bomb, the ghost of his father's final judgment hanging in the air like poison gas. Ava's hand tightened on his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging slightly into his sleeve. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "My God, what does this mean?" But Ethan didn't have an answer. He only knew that the war he had spent his entire life avoiding had just been declared, and his father, from beyond the grave, had just placed him on the throne, directly in the line of fire. The heels of Eleanor's shoes made no sound on the plush carpeting of the executive suite. After leaving the lawyer's office, she had not gone home to the suffocating silence of the family estate. She had come here, to her true home, her sanctuary, the corner office on the 50th floor of the Hayes Global Tower. The space was a reflection of its occupant, minimalist, modern, and brutally efficient, with a floor-to-ceiling glass wall that offered a godlike view of the city below. She did not pace, she did not weep, she did not throw the crystal paperweight against the glass. Rage is a chaotic and useless emotion, a fire that consumes its own fuel with no purpose. What was required now was not heat, but ice. She sat in her black leather throne of a chair, her hands folded neatly on the glass desk, and stared out at her kingdom, a kingdom that had been stolen from her. Her mind, a precision instrument honed by years of corporate warfare, began to dissect the problem. The will was ironclad. Her father and Abernathy had seen to that. A direct legal challenge would be a public, protracted, and likely futile war of attrition that would only damage the company's stock value. No, the will itself could not be the target. The target had to be the trustee. The target was Ethan. But how to neutralize him? She couldn't have him killed. This wasn't a medieval court, and such actions were messy and unsophisticated. She needed to remove him from the board, from his position of power, in a way that was clean, legal, and permanent. She needed to sever his control over the trust. To do that, she needed to prove him incapable, unfit to serve. And for that, she needed access. She needed an accomplice, someone who was already inside his life, inside his home, inside his heart. Her thoughts, cold and calculating, settled on the one variable in Ethan's life she had always considered a liability: his fiancée, Ava Chen. Eleanor had never trusted Ava. She saw the younger woman as an outsider, a beautiful but common girl whose ambition was poorly disguised by a veneer of gentle sweetness. On a whim born of habitual suspicion months earlier, she had commissioned a discreet but thorough background investigation on the woman who was set to marry her brother. The file was encrypted on her private server, a piece of ammunition she had stored away, unsure of when or if she would ever need it. Now, with a few clicks of her mouse, the file opened, and Ava's life story, the one she didn't share at family dinners, unfolded on the screen. It was all there. The small family farm in rural Iowa drowning in debt, the second mortgage, the threatening letters from the bank, and the most potent piece of leverage: her mother's recent diagnosis with a rare neurological condition and the corresponding mountain of medical bills that their small-town insurance would never cover. Ava wasn't just marrying for love. She was marrying for survival. And Eleanor knew, with absolute certainty, that survival was a far more powerful motivator than love. She summoned Ava 2 days later. The chosen location was not the family home, but a private table at an impossibly exclusive restaurant downtown, a place where whispers were the currency and privacy was guaranteed. The air was heavy with the scent of old money and expensive perfume. Ava arrived looking nervous and uncertain, twisting the strap of her purse. She likely expected a tense conversation about the inheritance, perhaps an offer from Eleanor to buy out Ethan's shares. She was unprepared for the surgical precision of the attack that was to come. Eleanor began with a masterful display of feigned sympathy, her voice smooth and concerned. "Ava, thank you for coming. I know this must be so difficult for you," she started, gesturing for the waiter to pour the wine. "I'm worried about Ethan. He's a wonderful man, a brilliant artist. But this is too much for him. My father didn't understand. This responsibility, it will crush him." She let the words sink in, painting a picture of Ethan's inevitable failure, framing her ambition as concern for her fragile brother. She then began to sow the seeds of fear. When Ethan fails, and he will fail, the company will suffer. The stock will plummet, the board will revolt. The life you've imagined for yourself, Ava, the security, the comfort, it's all built on a foundation that is about to crumble into dust. You'll be left with nothing but a broken man and a tarnished name. Ava tried to protest, to defend her fiancé's integrity, but her words were weak, lacking conviction even to her own ears. It was then that Eleanor played her trump card. She slid a thin, elegant manila folder across the table. It made a soft, damning sound as it came to rest in front of Ava. "I know you have other pressures," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "I want to help you, Ava. I truly do." With trembling fingers, Ava opened the folder. Inside, she saw it all. A copy of the foreclosure notice on her parents' farm. Scans of her mother's shockingly high medical bills. A satellite photo of the modest, run-down house she had grown up in. Her secret shame, her deepest fears, all laid bare on the pristine white tablecloth. She felt a wave of nausea. She was trapped. "What do you want?" Ava whispered, her voice barely audible. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Ava's. The mask of sympathy was gone, replaced by an expression of pure transactional clarity. "I want to save this family. I want to save this company. And to do that, I need to take control. Ethan needs to step aside. For his own good, of course." She paused, letting Ava absorb the implication. A man under that much stress, his mental state can become fragile. People have breakdowns all the time, especially sensitive, artistic types like my brother. All he needs is a little push, a period of rest and recovery, away from all this pressure, while I stabilize things for all of us. The proposition was laid out with chilling simplicity. If Ava helped create the narrative that Ethan was mentally unstable, Eleanor would not only pay off every cent of her family's debt, but she would also create a lucrative executive position for Ava at Hayes Global, complete with a 7-figure salary and stock options. A life beyond her wildest dreams. Security, not just for herself, but for her entire family, forever. Ava's mind was a maelstrom of conflict. She thought of Ethan's kindness, the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world, the genuine, uncomplicated affection he offered. But then, an image of her mother's weary, pain-etched face flooded her mind, followed by the image of her father, a proud man broken by financial ruin. She weighed Ethan's gentle love against the crushing, terrifying reality of her family's desperation. Eleanor's offer was a devil's bargain, a poison apple, but the life it promised was a powerful antidote to a lifetime of fear. Her rationalizations began to form, small, comforting lies to shield her from the monstrosity of what she was about to do. It's just for a little while. It's to protect him from himself. He would want me to save my family. Her silence was her answer. What? She finally breathed, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. What would I have to do? A slow, triumphant smile spread across Eleanor's face. Very little, she said softly. She reached into her expensive handbag and produced a small, clear glass vial containing a colorless liquid. It looked as innocuous as water. Our R&D division is truly remarkable, Eleanor explained. This is a low-dose, fast-metabolizing neuroleptic. Tasteless, odorless. Over a few weeks, it will gradually induce symptoms of anxiety, paranoia, and mild confusion. He won't even notice. He'll just feel overwhelmed. She pushed the vial across the table. It was cold to the touch. Just a few drops in his morning coffee, or his evening tea, Eleanor whispered, her voice a silken thread of pure poison. He'll start making mistakes, forgetting things, seeing conspiracies where there are none. You will be there to comfort him and to bear witness to his tragic decline. We are not hurting him, Ava. We are helping him. Ava stared at the vial, her reflection warped and small on its glass surface. With a hand that felt disconnected from her own body, she reached out, her fingers closing around it. In that silent, damning moment, the betrayal was sealed, not with a signature, but with the acceptance of a weapon disguised as medicine. The first act of betrayal was committed in the quiet, sunlit kitchen of the home Ethan shared with Ava. The air smelled of freshly ground coffee and toast, a scene of domestic tranquility so normal it felt obscene. Ava's hands trembled as she held the small, cold vial over Ethan's favorite ceramic mug. Her reflection was a distorted, monstrous version of herself in the dark, swirling liquid. She thought of her mother's smile, of the crisp foreclosure notice, of Eleanor's icy, expectant eyes. With a sharp intake of breath, she squeezed the dropper. 2 clear, heavy drops fell into the coffee, disappearing instantly, leaving no trace, no ripple, no evidence of the poison that had just tainted not only the drink, but the very foundations of their life together. It was an act of violence committed in absolute silence. She carried the mug to Ethan, who sat at the table sketching in his notebook, and placed it before him with a kiss on his forehead. "Here you go, my love," she said, her voice miraculously steady. He smiled up at her, a smile of pure, unsuspecting love, and took the first sip. The effect was not immediate, but insidious, a creeping fog that rolled into the landscape of Ethan's mind over the following weeks. The first week, it manifested as a profound and unshakable fatigue. He felt sluggish, his thoughts thick and slow. He started misplacing things, his keys, his wallet, a specific paintbrush he was just using. Each time, Ava would find it for him in an obvious place with a gentle, chiding smile. "Oh, Ethan, you'd lose your head if it wasn't attached," she'd say, her sweetness a subtle reinforcement that the failing was his. The second week, the fog began to curdle into anxiety. A constant, low-grade hum of dread settled deep in his chest. He became sensitive to sound. The ticking of a clock felt like a hammer. A passing siren made him jump. Sleep offered no escape, delivering instead a series of vague, unsettling dreams he could never quite remember upon waking. It was during this time that Eleanor began to apply pressure from the outside. She'd call an emergency board meeting, burying Ethan in complex financial reports he couldn't possibly digest in time. In the meeting, his mind would feel clouded, the numbers and charts swimming before his eyes. He would struggle to follow the conversation, asking a question that had been answered only moments before. The other board members would exchange brief, confused glances. Eleanor, from her seat across the table, would simply offer a patient, pitying smile that said, "See, he's not up to this." By the third week, the anxiety had bloomed into the first fragile blossoms of paranoia. He felt as though he was constantly being watched, judged. He started to doubt his own perceptions. He would walk into his studio, certain he had left a canvas in a particular spot, only to find it moved. "Ava, did you move my painting of the harbor?" he'd ask, a frantic edge to his voice. "No, darling, of course not," she would reply, her eyes wide with innocence. "It's been right there by the window all week. Are you feeling all right?" She was a masterful actress, her concern a form of psychological warfare, slowly convincing him that he could no longer trust his own mind. His art, his one sanctuary, became a place of torment. He would stand before a blank canvas for hours, his hands unable to translate the images in his head, his creative spark sputtering out in the chemical haze. The final act of the play required a stage and an audience. Eleanor arranged it perfectly. A small, intimate dinner at the family estate. The guests were two of the oldest, most influential members of the Hayes Global Board, men who had been fiercely loyal to her father and were still wary of her leadership. The stated purpose of the dinner was to discuss the company's Q4 strategy. The real purpose was to present Exhibit A, the mental collapse of Ethan Hayes. That evening, Ava, her hands now steady and practiced, administered a slightly larger dose of the drug into Ethan's pre-dinner cocktail. At the dinner table, the atmosphere was thick with corporate jargon and forced pleasantries. Eleanor expertly guided the conversation toward a high-stakes potential acquisition, then turned her full attention to her brother. "Ethan," she said, her voice ringing with false deference, "the board is divided on this. As the controlling trustee, your input is obviously the deciding factor. What are your thoughts on the risk analysis?" All eyes turned to Ethan. In his mind, the words of the conversation were a jumbled, echoing mess. The faces of the board members seemed to waver, their polite smiles looking like predatory snarls. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He opened his mouth to speak, but the thoughts wouldn't connect. He heard Eleanor whisper something to the man beside her, and in his paranoid, drug-addled state, he was certain he heard his own name, followed by the word unstable. That was the spark. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls breathing. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, his hand knocking over a glass of red wine that bled across the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. "Stop it," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Stop whispering about me. I know what you're doing. You're trying to push me out." He pointed a trembling finger at his sister. "You've been against me from the beginning." The two board members stared, their faces a mixture of shock and alarm. This wasn't a business disagreement. This was a complete, unhinged breakdown. Ava rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face, playing the part of the horrified, helpless fiancée to perfection. "Ethan, darling, please. Sit down. You're not well." The next morning, the trap was sprung. Eleanor insisted they call a doctor, a specialist. Dr. Alistair Finch arrived, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of calm authority. He was a man Eleanor had on a secret, exorbitant retainer for just such an occasion. He spoke to Ethan in soothing, patronizing tones, asking questions that seemed designed to confuse him further. Ethan, exhausted, terrified, and utterly disoriented, tried to explain the plot, the conspiracy, the feeling that his mind was not his own. But his frantic story, full of disjointed accusations and a profound sense of persecution, sounded to the clinical ear like a textbook case of paranoid psychosis. Ava provided the supporting evidence, a small, leather-bound journal where she had meticulously and fictitiously logged every instance of his erratic behavior for the past month. Eleanor then produced the final nail in the coffin, a durable power of attorney document. "He signed it a few weeks ago, doctor," she lied smoothly. I was helping him update his estate planning after father's death. He wanted to make sure the company was protected if anything happened to him. Ava had slipped it into a stack of gallery consignment forms, and Ethan, in his trusting fog, had signed it without reading. Dr. Finch nodded gravely, his face a mask of professional sympathy. The diagnosis was swift and severe. Acute paranoid psychosis, likely triggered by extreme stress. He strongly recommended immediate, involuntary inpatient treatment. It's for his own safety, he said, placing a comforting hand on Eleanor's shoulder. He needs a quiet, secure environment where we can help him. The committal papers were signed. An hour later, a discreet, private ambulance pulled up the long, winding driveway of the Hayes estate. The paramedics were efficient and detached. Ethan's protests were weak, his limbs heavy from a sedative doctor. Finch had insisted he take to calm his nerves. As they led him out of the house, his life's possessions now reduced to a small overnight bag packed by Ava, he looked at his fiancée one last time. His eyes begged for an answer, for a sign that this was all a nightmare, but she wouldn't meet his gaze, her face buried in her hands as she sobbed. The last thing he saw before the doors of the ambulance closed was Eleanor, standing in the grand entryway of their family home. Her expression a perfect, tragic mask of a sister forced to make a terrible choice. The takeover was complete. The king had been deposed. Thousands of miles from the hushed, manicured lawns of Boston, the air in a small village in the West African Sahel was thick with red dust and the cries of children. Here, in a world stripped bare of all but the essentials, Sophia Hayes was not a disinherited heiress. She was simply Sophie, the woman who knew how to set a broken bone, how to administer rehydration salts, and how to make a sick child laugh. Her life was a landscape of stark, sun-baked beauty and raw, unfiltered humanity. She hadn't set foot in the Hayes family estate in over 5 years, a self-imposed exile from a world she found morally bankrupt and emotionally vacant. Her only contact was the occasional, crackling satellite phone call with Ethan, their conversations a precious reminder of the one authentic bond she had left. The news of her father's death arrived not with a personal, grief-stricken call, but as a terse, 3-line email from Eleanor's personal assistant, received on a temperamental laptop powered by a solar generator. Mr. Richard Hayes. Deceased, cause, cardiac arrest. Funeral to be held this Friday. There was no warmth, no condolences, just cold, efficient information. Sophia felt not a sharp stab of grief, but a slow, heavy ache, the sorrow of a door finally and irrevocably closing on a relationship that had been a source of quiet pain for her entire life. She knew with a certainty that settled like a stone in her gut that she had to go back. The journey home was a jarring transition through worlds. It began with an 8-hour Jeep ride over rutted dirt roads to a regional airstrip and continued through a series of increasingly modern airports, from a dusty runway to a bustling hub in Europe, and finally, to the sleek, polished terminals of Logan International in Boston. With each flight, the red dust of the Sahel was washed away, replaced by the sterile chill of air conditioning and the scent of money. She watched the people change, their simple, practical clothing giving way to designer suits and expensive leather shoes. She felt like a ghost, an anthropologist returning to study the strange, cold customs of her native tribe. She arrived late Thursday night, deliberately missing the tense aftermath of the will reading, an event she had no interest in attending. Her only concern was Ethan. Her first call upon landing was not to Eleanor, but to her brother's cell phone. It went straight to a cold, impersonal voicemail. A knot of unease began to form in her stomach. The funeral was exactly as she had imagined. A grand, somber spectacle of power and influence. The historic Old South Church was filled not with weeping loved ones, but with a who's who of Boston's financial and political elite. It felt less like a service of remembrance and more like a corporate networking event with better floral arrangements. Men in dark suits spoke in hushed tones about market volatility, their expressions of grief as carefully tailored as their attire. Sophia, dressed in a simple, practical black dress she had bought at the airport, felt profoundly out of place. She watched Eleanor at the front, a perfect, stoic pillar of strength, accepting condolences with regal composure. Beside her stood Ava, playing the part of the bereaved fiancée flawlessly, dabbing at her dry eyes with a black lace handkerchief. But as Sophia scanned the pews, the knot of unease in her stomach tightened into a cold, hard dread. Ethan was not there. At the reception back at the Cavernous Hayes estate, Sophia cornered her sister near the grand fireplace. "Eleanor," she said, her voice low and direct, cutting through the polite chatter. "Where is he? Where is Ethan?" Eleanor turned, her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. "Oh, Sophia, I'm so glad you could make it. It's been terrible. Just terrible." Ava materialized at Eleanor's side as if on cue, her eyes red-rimmed and brimming with theatrical tears. "We tried to call you," Ava said, her voice catching. "The connection was so poor." Sophia ignored the diversion. "I tried to call Ethan. He didn't answer. Why isn't he here?" Eleanor sighed, a long, weary exhalation designed to convey an immense burden. "It's been the most awful part of all of this," she began, her voice a well-rehearsed symphony of sisterly concern. "The shock of Father's death? It was too much for him. He's so sensitive, you know. He had a complete breakdown, a nervous exhaustion." Ava picked up the narrative thread seamlessly. "He wasn't sleeping, he wasn't eating. He became so paranoid, so anxious. It was terrifying to watch. We had to get him help." Sophia stared at them, her mind racing, trying to fit the pieces of this story together with the brother she knew. Ethan was sensitive, yes. He was an artist. He felt things deeply, but he was also resilient. He had a core of quiet strength that had allowed him to survive years of their father's disapproval. He would not just shatter. "Help?" Sophia pressed. "What kind of help?" "Where is he?" "He's at a private wellness retreat in the Berkshires," Eleanor said quickly, her tone discouraging further questions. "A beautiful, quiet place. The doctors say he needs absolute rest. No phones, no visitors. Complete isolation is the only way he can heal." The story was smooth, polished, and utterly impenetrable. It was also, to Sophia, profoundly wrong. Her knowledge of her brother was a tuning fork, and their story struck a deeply discordant note. He would never miss his father's funeral, no matter how complicated their relationship had been, and he would never, ever shut her out. If he were in trouble, she would be the first person he would call. As the reception wore on, Sophia watched them, the quiet observer she had always been. She noticed things. She saw the flash of triumph in Eleanor's eyes when a board member referred to her as the new captain of the ship. She saw the way Ava's grief seemed to switch on and off, her tears conveniently timed for when she had an audience. When Sophia tried to ask for the name of the retreat or the primary doctor, Eleanor became elegantly evasive. "It's a very private facility, Sophia. We have to protect his privacy above all else. The doctors are in charge now. It's out of our hands." Later that night, long after the last of the mourners had departed, Sophia stood alone in the vast, silent hallway of the estate. She stopped in front of a large family portrait that had been painted a decade ago. In it, a younger, happier Ethan stood beside her, a mischievous glint in his eye, the two of them united in their shared secret that this world of stiff collars and forced smiles was a charade. The official story they had fed her echoed in the silence of the mansion, but it felt thin and cheap, a lie wrapped in expensive words. Her brother was not resting, he was not healing, he was gone. A cold resolve settled over her, as solid and unyielding as the marble beneath her feet. She reached out and lightly touched the painted face of her brother. "I don't believe you," she whispered to the empty, listening house. "I don't know what you've done, but whatever it is, I'm going to find him. I promise." The morning after the funeral, a cold, gray light filtered into the guest bedroom where Sophia was staying. To her, the grand, silent house felt less like a home and more like a crime scene, heavy with unspoken secrets. While the rest of the estate slumbered, lulled by a false sense of closure, Sophia's mind was already at work, sharp and focused. Her promise to her brother was not an emotional outburst, it was a mission directive. She began her search logically, methodically. She spent the first few hours on her laptop, compiling a list of every high-end private hospital, psychiatric facility, and exclusive wellness retreat in Massachusetts and the surrounding states. Then she started making calls. The responses were a uniform, impenetrable wall of polite refusal. "I'm sorry, we have no patient registered under that name. Due to federal HIPAA privacy laws, I cannot confirm or deny the presence of any individual at our facility. Our client list is strictly confidential." With each rejection, she felt the meticulous design of Eleanor's plan. Her sister had not just hidden Ethan, she had buried him under a mountain of legal and medical bureaucracy. Frustrated but not defeated, Sophia changed her strategy. If the outside world was a dead end, she had to look inward. She had to go to the one place where Ethan's true self resided, the one place he would have left a trace, a breadcrumb, a clue, his sanctuary, the art studio. It was a converted carriage house, set 100 yards away from the main mansion, separated by a manicured lawn and a small grove of birch trees. It had always been Ethan's escape, a world of his own making. As she approached, she saw a new, shiny brass padlock on the heavy oak door. Of course, Eleanor would have thought of that. For a moment, Sophia's heart sank. But then, a memory from their childhood surfaced. A game of hide and seek. A loose brick at the base of the chimney where they used to hide a spare key. Her fingers, trembling slightly, found the rough edge of the brick and pulled. It came away easily. And there, nestled in the dark, dusty cavity, was a small, cold, iron key. A key only she and Ethan would have known about. The air inside the studio was still and thick with the familiar, comforting scent of linseed oil, turpentine, and old canvas. Sunlight streamed through the large, north-facing windows, illuminating millions of dancing dust motes. Everything looked as if Ethan had just stepped out for a moment. A half-finished painting stood on a large easel, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the gray mood that had enveloped the family. Stacks of canvases leaned against the walls, and jars filled with brushes of every size stood in organized chaos on a long wooden workbench. Sophia's initial search yielded nothing. His desk was neat, his correspondence ordinary. There was no note, no sign of distress. It felt unnervingly normal, which in itself felt wrong. She was about to leave, a wave of despair washing over her, when her gaze fell upon a low bookshelf overflowing with art history tomes. Tucked behind the shelf, almost completely obscured, was the spine of a small black notebook that had seemingly been knocked off the top. It wasn't one of his large, professional sketchbooks. This was smaller, more personal, a Moleskine journal. With a sense of both hope and dread, she sat in Ethan's worn leather armchair and opened it. The first dozen pages were pure Ethan. Exquisite pencil studies of Ava's hands, quick, energetic sketches of birds at the feeder outside the window, detailed architectural drawings of a nearby church spire. But as she turned the pages, a disturbing transformation began. The clean, confident lines grew more erratic, more frantic. The portraits became distorted, the eyes wide with a subtle fear. Then came the words, scrawled in the margins, in Ethan's elegant but now shaky handwriting. At first, they were simple observations. Feeling foggy today, so tired. A few pages later, can't sleep again. The silence in this house is so loud. Then the notes took a darker turn. My morning coffee tastes strange. A metallic, bitter aftertaste. Ava says I'm imagining it. Sophia's blood ran cold. She read on, her heart pounding against her ribs. I keep misplacing things. My wallet, my favorite palette knife. Ava is always patient, always finds them for me. But her smile is different now. The final few pages were barely legible, the sketches devolving into dark, chaotic scribbles. And then, on the very last page, a single, desperate sentence that felt like a scream. Ava, Eleanor, they're watching me. I know they are. Sophia slammed the book shut, her hands shaking. This was it. This was not the journal of a man having a breakdown. This was the journal of a man being poisoned, of a mind being methodically dismantled. The puzzle was missing a piece, though. She needed corroboration, another witness to the events leading up to his disappearance. Her mind immediately went to Mr. Power, Hemlock, the family's butler for over 30 years. He was a kind, observant man who had been a quiet fixture in their lives since she and Ethan were children. She remembered hearing one of the kitchen staff mention at the funeral that Eleanor had abruptly fired him just a week prior. The timing was too coincidental. After a few discreet inquiries, she found his new address, a small apartment in a modest neighborhood south of the city, a world away from the gilded cage where he had spent his career. Mr. Hemlock was hesitant to even open the door. He was a man who looked defeated, stripped of the quiet dignity of his former position. He was afraid, his eyes darting nervously as if expecting one of Eleanor's black cars to pull up outside. "Miss Sophia," he said, his voice raspy, "I cannot get involved. Please." Sophia looked him in the eye, her own gaze steady and sincere. "Mr. Hemlock, I am not asking you to get involved. I am asking you to help me save my brother. You've known Ethan since he was a boy. You know his character. He is in terrible danger, and I think you know more than you're saying." She saw a flicker of the old loyalty in his eyes. He sighed, defeated by his own conscience, and let her in. Inside his small, meticulously tidy apartment, he told her everything. He spoke of the hushed, intense meetings between Eleanor and Ava in the library after the will was read. He described the change in Ava, how she had become furtive and nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. And then came the most crucial detail. She started making his coffee and his tea herself, Miss Sophia. Every morning, every night. She never used to do that. And she would never let anyone else touch the cup before she gave it to him. I thought it was oddly attentive. He then told her about his dismissal. He had made a passing comment to a housekeeper that Mr. Ethan seemed unwell, that he looked pale and exhausted. 2 days later, Eleanor had summoned him, coldly informing him that his services were no longer required due to his advancing age and a tendency toward gossip. He was a loose end, and Eleanor had ruthlessly tied him off. Driving back to the estate, the city lights blurring past her window, Sophia felt the last pieces of the puzzle click into place with horrifying clarity. Ethan's frantic journal entries, the butler's suspicious observations, the new padlock on the studio, the perfectly rehearsed story, it was all interconnected. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a conspiracy. Ethan hadn't fallen. He had been pushed. He had been systematically drugged, gaslighted, and ultimately disposed of like a failed corporate asset. The cold knot of suspicion in her stomach had now hardened into a core of pure, unadulterated certainty. Her mission had a new name. It wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a hunt. Sophia sat in a nondescript coffee shop miles from the Hayes estate, the leather-bound sketchbook open on the table in front of her. The aroma of roasted coffee and pastries seemed alien, a scent from a world of normal problems and simple worries. In her hands, she held proof of a monstrous crime, yet it felt as fragile as a whisper. Ethan's frantic scrawls and Mr. Hemlock's fearful testimony were a compelling narrative, but she knew it was a story that would never stand up against the legal fortress Eleanor could and would build around herself. Going to the police was out of the question. They would see a grieving, unstable young woman making wild accusations against her powerful, well-respected sister. They would see a family squabble over an inheritance, not an attempted murder of mind and soul. Eleanor's lawyers would drown her in motions and countersuits before she could even finish her first sentence. She was an amateur standing at the base of a mountain, and she knew she could not climb it alone. She needed a guide. She needed someone who knew the terrain, someone who was not intimidated by power, and someone who operated in the shadows. A memory surfaced, distant but clear. She was a teenager, hiding at the top of the grand staircase, listening to her father's booming voice from his study. He was on the phone, angry about a security leak at the company. "Get Miller on it," he had barked. "I don't want some corporate suit. I want a bloodhound, not a poodle. Get me Jim Miller." The name had stuck in her mind. James Miller. He was a retired Boston police homicide detective, a man her father had occasionally used for sensitive, off-the-books corporate investigations. He was a man Richard Hayes, who respected very few, had respected for his tenacity. He was a bloodhound, and Sophia needed a bloodhound. Finding him wasn't hard. A few searches through public records led her to a small, unassuming bungalow in South Boston, a neighborhood of tightly packed houses and worn-out pride, a place the Hayes family limousine would never be seen. The lawn was in need of a mow, and the gray paint on the porch was peeling. It was the home of a man who had stopped caring about appearances long ago. She rang the bell, and after a long moment, the door opened a few inches, held by a chain lock. A pair of sharp, tired blue eyes peered out from a deeply lined face. "Yeah? What do you want?" the man grumbled. His voice was like gravel. "Are you James Miller?" Sophia asked, her own voice sounding surprisingly steady. "My name is Sophia Hayes. Richard Hayes was my father." The man's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something annoyance, recognition, distaste crossing his face. He grunted, undid the chain, and opened the door wider. "A Hayes, huh? What did you do? Lose a diamond bracelet?" He was wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans, and he looked at her simple dress and worn-out boots with a cynical, appraising gaze. He gestured for her to come in. The house was cluttered but clean, smelling of old books, stale coffee, and a faint hint of whiskey. Books and stacks of old case files covered every available surface. He cleared a pile of newspapers off a worn armchair and pointed. "Sit. Talk." Sophia didn't waste time with pleasantries. She knew this man would not respond to emotional appeals. He dealt in facts, so she gave him facts. She laid out the timeline, her voice calm and even. The death of her father, the shocking terms of the will, Ethan's sudden, convenient breakdown, the perfectly polished story she was fed by Eleanor and Ava. She recounted Mr. Hemlock's testimony about the secret meetings and Ava's strange behavior. Miller listened, his expression unchanging, occasionally taking a sip from a chipped coffee mug. He seemed thoroughly unimpressed. "So what?" he finally interrupted, his voice laced with cynicism. "Your father was a shark, your sister's a shark. Your brother was a guppy who couldn't swim in the same tank. Rich family problems. It's not a police matter, and I'm not the police anymore. I'm retired." "It's more than that," Sophia insisted, leaning forward. She opened her bag and carefully placed Ethan's sketchbook on the cluttered coffee table between them. "This was my brother's journal for the weeks leading up to his disappearance. Please, just look at the last few pages." Miller sighed, a long, weary sound, but he picked up the book. Sophia watched as the retired detective's instincts slowly flickered back to life. He wasn't just reading the words, he was examining the evidence. He squinted at the pages, his thumb tracing the erratic, deeply indented pencil lines. He saw the progression, the slow decay of a confident artist's hand into a terrified scrawl. He was a man who had spent 30 years reading the stories told by bloodstains and bullet holes, and he could read the story here. This wasn't a mind that had simply broken. This was a mind that had been systematically deconstructed. "Ava, Eleanor, they're watching me." He read the last line aloud, his voice a low growl. He closed the book and looked at Sophia, his eyes holding a new sharp focus. The cynical retiree was gone, replaced by the detective. Still, he resisted. "This is compelling," he admitted, tapping the cover of the sketchbook. "But it's not proof. It's the word of a fired butler and a notebook from a man who is, by all official accounts, mentally ill. Eleanor Hayes has a legal team that could tie this up in court until your great-grandchildren are old. They'd paint you as a bitter, disinherited sister trying to steal your sick brother's fortune. You'd be ruined." "I don't care about being ruined," Sophia said, her voice quiet but fierce. "I care about finding my brother. I'm not asking you to make an arrest. I'm asking you to help me find the truth. You're the only person I can think of who wouldn't be afraid of my family's name. I can pay you." Miller held up a hand, cutting her off. "Don't insult me," he grumbled. "Your family's money is the problem, not the solution. This stinks to high heaven, kid. It's audacious. It's the kind of clean, quiet, high society crime that always intrigued me." He was silent for a long time, staring at the sketchbook. He was bored in his retirement, she realized. He missed the hunt. And she had just brought a magnificent, wounded beast right to his doorstep. "All right," he said finally, the word hanging in the air. "But we do this my way. This is off the books. I'm a private citizen offering advice. You are my client. If this goes sideways, I was never involved. You understand? Sophia nodded, a wave of relief so profound it almost made her dizzy. I understand. Good, Miller grunted, suddenly all business. He leaned forward, the hunter's gleam back in his eye. He was no longer advising, he was commanding. You're not just a client. You're my legs and ears. I'm too old and too known to go poking around. You, on the other hand, are just a concerned sister. You mentioned a doctor, Alistair Finch in the Blackwood Ridge Sanitarium? Sophia nodded. I've been a cop in this city for 30 years. Never heard of it. That means it's either brand new or it's not a real hospital. It's a private prison for rich people's problems. Your first assignment is to find out everything you can about it. Ownership records, board of directors, financial backers. Find out who signs the checks at that place. And Sophia, he added, his voice dropping to a serious, cautionary tone, from this moment on, you assume that you are being watched. Eleanor didn't go to all this trouble to leave things to chance. You're not just looking for your brother anymore. You're poking a hornet's nest with a very short stick. Don't get stung. With Ethan neutralized and the reins of power firmly in her hands, Eleanor Hayes did not just occupy her father's office. She commanded it. Power was not a burden for her. It was her natural element, the air she was always meant to breathe. Freed from her father's cautious oversight and her brother's moral inertia, her ambition was unleashed, and it was a magnificent, terrifying thing to behold. She moved through the company like a storm, her confidence swelling into a dangerous arrogance. Long-serving executives, men who had been with her father for decades, were dismissed with a cold, bloodless efficiency for the crime of being loyal to the old regime. She called it streamlining. They called it a purge. She initiated high-risk, high-reward ventures that made the board nervous, but her early successes silenced most critics. To the financial world, she was a visionary, a bold new leader, unafraid to shed the company's conservative skin. But in her haste to consolidate her empire, she was creating enemies, leaving a trail of disgruntled, powerful men who now sat on the sidelines, their loyalty to the Hayes name replaced by a burning desire for revenge. While Eleanor thrived in the harsh, bright glare of power, Ava withered in its shadow. She had everything she had ever dreamed of: a limitless bank account, a place in high society, the security of the Hayes name. The sprawling home she had once shared with Ethan was now hers alone, a gilded cage where she was tormented by the ghost of the man she had betrayed. The silence in the huge, empty rooms was deafening. She took to drinking expensive champagne in the middle of the day, the bubbles doing little to numb the constant, gnawing guilt. Paranoia became her constant companion. Every creak of the old house was an intruder. Every ringing phone was a call from someone who knew. She had security cameras installed throughout the property, and she would spend hours staring at the grainy footage on her tablet, a prisoner watching her own prison. The life she had paid for with her soul was not the paradise she had imagined, but a private, luxurious hell. She was the conspiracy's weakest link, a frayed nerve twitching with guilt and fear, waiting for the one touch that would make it snap. That touch was being orchestrated from a cluttered bungalow in South Boston. Sophia and James Miller had formed an unlikely but effective partnership. Miller, with the instincts of a predator and the patience of a spider, began his work in the shadows. He spent his days on the phone, calling in favors from old contacts, his voice a low, friendly growl that could coax information from the most reluctant of sources. He put a feeler out to a friend in the state medical board about Dr. Alistair Finch, and the report that came back was telling. Finch was brilliant, but he was also a mercenary, with a history of providing convenient diagnoses for wealthy families with troublesome relatives. He then started digging into the Blackwood Ridge Sanitarium. As he suspected, it wasn't a hospital. Public ownership records showed it was owned by a holding company, which was owned by another shell corporation. It was a Russian doll of legal entities designed to hide its true ownership. Miller was a weaver, pulling on these loose threads, knowing that eventually, the entire tapestry of Eleanor's grand design would begin to unravel. While Miller worked the back channels, Sophia's role was on the front lines. Her first target, identified by Miller through a source at the Department of Labor, was Marcus Thorne, the former chief financial officer of Hayes Global. Thorne was a numbers man, precise and cautious, fiercely loyal to Richard Hayes's conservative financial strategies. Eleanor had fired him 3 weeks after her takeover for vocally opposing a risky, leveraged buyout of a rival biotech firm. Sophia arranged a meeting. The location a quiet, anonymous bench in a public park, a place of neutral territory. Thorne arrived, looking wary and hostile. "I don't know why I'm here," he said, not even looking at her. "Do you have any idea what your sister can do to me? She can blacklist me in this industry with a single phone call." Sophia didn't try to appeal to his greed or pity. She appealed to his pride and his principles. "I know," she said calmly. "But you and I both know she's running that company into the ground with reckless gambles. You spent 25 years helping my father build that company. Are you going to sit by and watch her burn it down?" She then leaned in, lowering her voice. "This isn't just about the company, Marcus. This is about my brother. I think Eleanor did something to him to get control, and I think you, more than anyone, would have seen the signs in the financial records." She saw a flicker of conflict in his eyes. He hated Eleanor, but he feared her more. As a final, desperate gambit, Sophia took out her phone and showed him a photo of one of Ethan's journal pages, the one with the shaky handwriting about the coffee tasting strange. "This isn't about business, Marcus. This is about a good man who was hurt." That was what broke through his fear. He looked at the photo for a long time, then sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "I can't give you documents," he whispered, his eyes darting around the park. "It would be corporate theft. But I can tell you where to look." He told her about a dormant subsidiary, a shell corporation called Viridian Health Solutions, that Hayes Global had acquired years ago. It had no assets, no employees. It was a ghost company. After your father died, Thorne explained, Eleanor reactivated it. She started funneling money through it. Large, recurring payments. She classified them as specialized consulting fees and facilities maintenance contracts. My access was blocked when I tried to audit the recipients. It was the reason she fired me. He gave her the names. One recipient was a private account belonging to Dr. Alistair Finch. The other was the holding company that owned Blackwood Ridge. "The money trail is there, Sophia," he said, standing up to leave. "If you can get access to it, you can prove anything." With her first piece of hard evidence secured, Sophia turned her attention to the second front, Ava. It was time to tighten the psychological net. She began subtly, artfully. One afternoon, she accidentally ran into Ava at a high-end boutique. Ava froze, her face pale. Sophia just gave her a small, sad smile. "This was one of Ethan's favorite shops," she said softly, just loud enough for Ava to hear. "He always said you could tell a lot about a person by the things they choose to surround themselves with." The comment was innocent on the surface, but it landed like a dart, reminding Ava that her entire luxurious life was built upon a lie. The final, decisive move of the week came late one night. In his office, Miller had finally untangled the web of shell corporations and found the ultimate owner of Blackwood Ridge Sanitarium, Viridian Health Solutions, the ghost company controlled by Eleanor. They now had a direct, undeniable financial link between Eleanor, the doctor, and the prison where Ethan was being held. At that same moment, across town, Ava was in the master bedroom of the Hayes estate, staring at the screen of her phone. A text had arrived from an unknown number. There were no words. It was just a picture. A candid photo of her and Ethan, taken on her phone months ago, sitting on a park bench, laughing, his arm around her, the sun in her hair. A moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. A moment from a life she had destroyed. She dropped the phone on the thick carpet as if it had burned her hand, a strangled sob escaping her lips. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And the walls of her gilded cage were beginning to close in. In James Miller's cluttered office, which had become the designated war room for their two-person insurgency, a large whiteboard was covered in a chaotic web of names, dates, and arrows. It was the anatomy of a crime, connecting Eleanor and Ava to Dr. Finch, Dr. Finch to Blackwood Ridge, and Blackwood Ridge to the Ghost Corporation, Viridian Health Solutions. They had Ethan's journal, a powerful narrative of his torment. They had Mr. Hemlock's testimony, a damning corroboration. And now, thanks to Marcus Thorne, they had the money trail, a cold, hard line of financial data that proved the conspiracy was real. Miller stood back from the board, a stale cigarillo perched in the corner of his mouth. "It's a hell of a story, kid," he said, his voice a low grumble. "A damn good one. But a high-priced lawyer will call it a work of fiction. They'll say Ethan was genuinely ill, the journal proves it. They'll say Eleanor was a concerned sister paying for the best care. They'll say Thorne is a disgruntled employee. It's a mountain of circumstantial evidence, and any decent defense attorney can turn it into a mountain of reasonable doubt." Sophia stared at the board, at the names of the people who had tried to erase her brother. Miller was right. They didn't have enough to guarantee justice in a courtroom, not against a foe with the infinite resources of Eleanor Hayes. A quiet arrest and a long, drawn-out legal battle would allow Eleanor to control the narrative, to paint herself as the victim. They needed to do more than just blow up the mountain of doubt. They needed to trigger an avalanche that would bury Eleanor completely. "Then we don't fight her in a courtroom first," Sophia said, her voice quiet but steely. "We fight her in her own kingdom. We have to strip her of her power and her reputation before she ever gets a chance to use them." Her eyes lit up with a sudden, audacious idea. "The Hayes Foundation Gala," she said. "It's next Saturday. It's the biggest charity event of the year in Boston. It's Eleanor's official coronation as the new matriarch, the philanthropist, the benevolent leader. The media will be there, the board, shareholders, politicians, everyone. It's the night she cements her public image." Miller's tired eyes gleamed with a new light. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. He understood immediately. "You don't just want to put her in a cage," he said, a note of admiration in his gravelly voice. "You want to burn down her kingdom in front of all her subjects first. I like it." The plan that took shape over the next 48 hours was complex and incredibly high risk. It had 3 critical components. The first, and most dangerous, was the rescue. "We have to get Ethan out," Miller stated, his voice all business. "He's the living proof. We do it during the gala. Eleanor will be the center of attention, completely distracted. Her security will be focused on the event, not on a quiet sanitarium hours away." Miller made a single phone call to a man named Sully, a former SWAT commander who now ran a discreet and very expensive private security firm. The conversation was short and coded, but the mission was clear: a quiet, non-violent extraction from Blackwood Ridge, timed to the minute. The second component was turning the conspiracy's weakest link. "Ava," Sophia said, her expression hardening. "She's the key. We need her to confess. We need her to be our witness." Miller was skeptical, but Sophia was firm. "She's terrified. We just have to make her more afraid of Eleanor than she is of us." Sophia devised a lure. Using a burner phone, she sent Ava a text message designed to prey on her deepest fear. "Eleanor knows you're a liability. She's making arrangements to clean up loose ends. Meet me if you want to survive." She named a time and a room number at an anonymous airport hotel. The final part of the plan was the public execution. At the gala, during Eleanor's keynote address, Sophia would seize control. Miller, through another old contact, found a freelance, A divided by V technician, who held a grudge against the event company managing the gala and who, for a price, was willing to provide Sophia with a backdoor into the ballroom's presentation system. The meeting with Ava was the moment the entire plan teetered on a knife's edge. Sophia arrived first, choosing a sterile, impersonal hotel room. When Ava slipped inside, she looked like a ghost, her face pale and drawn, her expensive clothes hanging off her thin frame. Sophia didn't waste time with threats. She calmly and methodically laid out a series of documents on the small table between them: bank statements from Viridian Health, copies of the wire transfers to Dr. Finch, visitor logs from Blackwood Ridge with Ava's name signed neatly on the dotted line. "The game is over, Ava," Sophia said, her voice devoid of emotion. We have it all. And when this comes out, who do you think Eleanor will sacrifice? The brilliant CEO who was misled, or the obsessed, unstable fiancé who she will claim acted alone out of jealousy and greed? She will tear you to pieces on the witness stand. She will feed you to the wolves to save herself. You will be the villain in her tragic story. Ava began to sob, her body shaking with a mixture of terror and self-loathing. "What do you want from me?" she whispered through her tears. "I want you to save yourself," Sophia replied, offering the first glimmer of a lifeline. "There is one other path. You tell us everything. You give us one piece of irrefutable proof that we can use against her, something she can't possibly deny. You agree to testify. In return, I will tell the district attorney that you were coerced, that you showed remorse, and that you cooperated fully. It will not make you innocent, Ava. Nothing can do that. But it might make you a witness instead of a primary conspirator." Ava looked at Sophia, her mind racing, weighing certain ruin against a sliver of hope. After a long, agonizing silence, she nodded, her body slumping in defeat and relief. She confessed everything, the story pouring out of her in a torrent of guilt-ridden detail. Then she gave them the smoking gun. With trembling hands, she took out her phone. She had secretly recorded a phone call with Eleanor a few weeks ago, a moment when her own conscience had gotten the better of her. The audio was crystal clear. Ava's panicked voice saying, "I keep thinking, what if someone finds out?" Followed by Eleanor's cold, impatient reply, "Stop being hysterical. The doctors have him certified. Just make sure he stays medicated and out of sight. I will handle the rest." It was a direct, unambiguous order. It was everything they needed. With Ava's confession and the audio file secured, the final pieces of the plan clicked into place. The night of the Hayes Foundation Gala was now just 2 days away. In his office, Miller confirmed the final details with Sully's extraction team. Across town, Sophia met with the A/V technician, a USB drive containing the evidence held tightly in her hand. And in a hotel room, a broken and terrified Ava provided a detailed schematic of the gala's security layout. The countdown had begun. The stage was set, the script was written, and the players were all in position. The time for whispers and secrets was over. The time for the storm to break had arrived. The grand ballroom of the Copley Plaza was a glittering galaxy of wealth and influence, a room where power was the currency and reputation was the coin of the realm. The annual Hayes Foundation Gala was the crowning jewel of the Boston social season, and tonight it was unequivocally Eleanor's coronation. She moved through the throng of politicians, billionaires, and society mavens like a queen, draped in a gown the color of blood rubies, her smile as brilliant and hard as the diamonds at her throat. She was at the absolute apex of her power, radiating a triumphant energy that captivated everyone in her orbit. She was untouchable, a titan in her prime, and as she prepared to take the stage for her keynote address, she had no idea that her entire kingdom was about to be turned to ashes. At that exact moment, 200 miles away, in the moonless dark of the Berkshires, a different kind of drama was unfolding in absolute silence. Sully's 3-man extraction team, clad in black and moving with the fluid grace of ghosts, slipped through the perimeter fence of the Blackwood Ridge Sanitarium. They bypassed the sleepy security guard and disabled the cameras with practiced ease. Inside, the corridors were quiet, the air stale with the scent of disinfectant and despair. They reached Ethan's room, a Spartan cell at the end of a long, isolated wing. A complex electronic lock on the door was bypassed in under 30 seconds. When they entered, Ethan was awake, staring at the ceiling, a ghost haunting his own life. He was thin, pale, his eyes wide and clouded from the steady regimen of sedatives, but as a friendly, professional hand touched his shoulder and a voice whispered, "Mr. Hayes, we're here to take you home." A flicker of lucid hope returned to his eyes. They helped him dress, and with an arm around his frail shoulders, they led him out of his prison. A silent, seamless extraction from a life that had been stolen from him. The king was being freed. Back at the gala, the room fell into a hush as Eleanor stepped up to the podium, bathed in the warm glow of a spotlight. She began her speech. her voice resonating with a perfectly calibrated blend of strength and compassion. "Legacy," she began, her gaze sweeping across the adoring crowd. "It is a word my father valued above all others. A legacy not just of profit, but of purpose. Our family has always believed that with great privilege comes an even greater responsibility, a responsibility to care for the vulnerable, to support the afflicted, and to ensure that no one is ever left behind or forgotten." The hypocrisy was so profound, so audacious, it was almost a work of art. As she neared her speech's crescendo, speaking of a new mental health initiative the foundation was launching, she raised her hand in a dramatic gesture toward the 3 enormous screens behind her, which were meant to display the foundation's logo. But the logo never appeared. Instead, the screens flickered, went black for a single, jarring second, and then flashed back to life with a single, devastating image. It was a live feed of a man's face, gaunt and pale, but his eyes were clear, and in them burned a quiet, righteous anger. A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the ballroom. It was Ethan Hayes. In the stunned silence, as Eleanor froze at the podium, her triumphant smile collapsing into a mask of pure shock, Sophia Hayes walked calmly up the side steps and onto the stage. She took a microphone from a bewildered stagehand, her movements calm and deliberate. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the room with absolute clarity. "Good evening," she said. "Please forgive the interruption. My sister was just speaking about legacy and about not leaving the afflicted behind. I am here tonight to tell you the story of what happened to my brother, a man who was afflicted and who was deliberately left behind." The takedown was a masterclass in psychological warfare. "My brother did not have a breakdown," Sophia stated, as the screens behind her changed to show a scanned page from Ethan's journal, his frantic, elegant handwriting magnified for all to see. "He was poisoned, slowly, methodically, by the woman he loved, at the direction of the sister he trusted." She quoted his words aloud. "My morning coffee tastes strange, a metallic, bitter aftertaste. Ava says I'm imagining it." Next, the screens displayed a simplified flowchart, the one Miller had drawn on his whiteboard. It showed the labyrinthine path of money from a Hayes Global subsidiary, through Viridian Health Solutions, and into the bank accounts of Dr. Alistair Finch and the Blackwood Ridge Sanitarium. "This," Sophia announced, her voice ringing with cold fury, "is a spreadsheet of payments. It is the price my sister was willing to pay to steal a man's life." Eleanor finally found her voice, a shrill, panicked shriek. "Lies! This is slander. She's a bitter, jealous child making up stories." But her denials were drowned out by Sophia's final, brutal move. "You may think this is just my word against hers," Sophia said to the spellbound audience. "A family dispute. But what if you could hear the architect of this crime confess in her own words?" She held her phone up to the microphone, and a crystal-clear audio file began to play, broadcast through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. First, Ava's panicked voice. "I keep thinking, what if someone finds out?" And then, the voice of the woman on the stage, cold, impatient, and utterly damning. "Stop being hysterical. The doctors have him certified. Just make sure he stays medicated and out of sight. I will handle the rest." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of pure horror. Every eye was on Eleanor, whose face had crumpled, the mask of power and grace utterly shattered, leaving only the raw, ugly face of guilt. Down in the audience, a single spotlight, prearranged by the A/V technician, snapped on, illuminating Ava Chen at her table. She rose to her feet, her body trembling, tears streaming down her face, a portrait of a soul that had finally broken. "It's true," she cried out, her voice a raw, desperate wail that needed no microphone. "All of it. I helped her. I did it. Oh God, I'm so sorry." Her public confession was the final, fatal blow, the nail in Eleanor's coffin. The gala erupted into chaos. Journalists scrambled for their phones, photographers' flashes strobed like lightning, and the glittering guests recoiled from Eleanor as if she were radioactive. She stood alone on the stage, isolated in the spotlight, a queen deposed in the ruins of her own coronation. Through the chaos at the ballroom's entrance, a small group of calm, authoritative figures made their way through the crowd. They were detectives, their badges discreetly displayed. As they approached the stage, Eleanor stared out at the wreckage of her life, her expression settling into a mask of pure, reptilian hatred, aimed directly at her sister. A quiet, grim-faced detective stepped onto the stage and stood before her. "Eleanor Hayes," he said, his voice calm and professional amidst the pandemonium. "You are under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy to commit fraud, and assault." The public execution was complete. The kingdom had fallen. The fallout from the Hayes Foundation gala was not merely a scandal. It was a societal earthquake. The story of the beautiful, ruthless CEO and the brother she had tried to erase dominated the news cycle for weeks. A modern-day Greek tragedy played out on the front pages of every newspaper and on every television screen. Eleanor's kingdom had not just been burned, its ashes had been scattered to the winds. In the quiet, sterile environment of a real hospital, far from the prying eyes of the world, Ethan Hayes began the slow process of rebuilding his life. The drugs took weeks to fully leave his system, but with every passing day, the fog in his mind lifted, replaced by a new, unfamiliar clarity. He was attended constantly by Sophia, their bond reforged in the fires of conspiracy and justice, now stronger and more unbreakable than ever. The man who emerged from that hospital was not the same gentle, naive artist who had been dragged into the darkness. He was still quiet, still observant, but the trauma had stripped away his passivity, forging in its place a core of tempered steel. He saw the world for what it was now, a place of both breathtaking beauty and profound cruelty. The wheels of justice, once set in motion, ground forward with relentless force. Ava Chen, her confession echoing through the court, was treated with a degree of leniency. Her testimony was crucial in cementing the case against Eleanor. She was sentenced to 5 years in a minimum security prison for her role in the conspiracy. Her true punishment, however, was a lifetime spent with the knowledge of her betrayal, forever haunted by the memory of the good man she had sold for a life she could not keep. Eleanor, ever the fighter, was defiant. Her legal team, the best money could buy, threw up a wall of denials and obfuscations. But the evidence, the journal, the money trail, and the damning audio recording was insurmountable. She was found guilty on all initial charges: kidnapping, fraudulent imprisonment, and conspiracy. As she awaited sentencing, facing a decade or more behind bars, she remained cold, arrogant, and utterly unrepentant. But James Miller was a man who hated loose ends. The sheer, brutal efficiency of Eleanor's plan bothered him. There was one detail that felt too perfect, too convenient: the timing of their father's death. Richard Hayes had died just days after signing a will that disempowered his favorite child. For a bloodhound like Miller, that smelled less like a coincidence and more like an opening move. On a hunch, he started digging into Richard's final weeks. He pulled hospital records, coroner's reports, and pharmacy logs. And then he found it. 3 weeks before his death, Richard's longtime cardiologist had retired. His new physician, who had prescribed a new, more potent medication for his arrhythmia, was Dr. Alistair Finch. Miller felt a jolt of ice in his veins. Working with the district attorney's office, he secured a warrant to investigate further. A toxicology analysis of Richard Hayes's preserved medical samples revealed a horrifying truth. The new medication, when combined with his existing regimen, was known to cause catastrophic cardiac events in a small percentage of patients with his specific condition. It wasn't a treatment, it was a ticking time bomb, a slow, clinical, and perfectly deniable murder. The money trail was there too. Another series of untraceable payments from Viridian Health Solutions into Dr. Finch's accounts, dated the week he took Richard Hayes on as a patient. The final scene of Eleanor's downfall did not take place in a glittering ballroom, but in the gray, sterile interview room of a women's correctional facility. As her lawyer sat beside her, the district attorney laid out the new evidence. The charge was not conspiracy anymore. It was murder in the first degree. For the first time, Eleanor's mask of icy defiance did not just crack, it shattered. The raw, primal terror of a life spent and ending in a concrete box, with no hope of parole, finally registered on her face. She had not just tried to steal her brother's life, she had successfully stolen her father's. And for that, she would be buried by the very justice system she thought she was clever enough to manipulate. Months later, a fragile peace had settled over the Hayes family. Ethan, to everyone's surprise, had taken his seat at the head of the boardroom table. He did not rule with his father's iron fist or his sister's venomous ambition, but with a quiet, thoughtful integrity that began to slowly heal the toxic culture of the company. Sophia stayed with him through the transition, her practical, no-nonsense approach a perfect anchor for his more creative mind. Once she was sure he was steady, she prepared to return to the life she had chosen, her work in the red dust of the Sahel. Their farewell at the airport was not sad. It was a promise, a silent acknowledgement that no matter where they were in the world, they would forever be watching over one another. On his first day alone in his father's massive office, Ethan had all the expensive, abstract art removed. In its place, on the vast wall behind the mahogany desk, he hung a single, small painting. It was one of his own, a simple landscape of a quiet harbor at dawn, the light just beginning to break through the darkness. He had finally found a way to integrate his two selves, the artist and the heir, the survivor and the steward. And as he looked out at the city, he finally understood the profound truth that had been forged in the crucible of his suffering. So let this be a lesson, a whispered warning carried on the wind. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much. For they have been listening, they have been watching, and they have been learning. And when they finally decide to act, their voice will not just be a sound, it will be a reckoning. The Hayes family found their own terrible form of justice, but how many other secrets lie waiting behind the closed doors of grand estates? How many other families are rotting from the inside out? Join us next time as we unlock another door and tell another story.